Well, what a pleasure. I'm absolutely delighted now to be joined by Congressman Patrick Kennedy. Congressman, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm sure you've got a busy schedule.
It is. It's great to be thinking and focusing on mental health all the time. I wish our country could come around to the notion that we'd all be better off if we did more for mental health.
Now, there's a few things I want to get into, so let's sort of get stuck in. One of the things I know you campaign on is parity.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I was honored as a member of Congress to be the author of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, named for Pete Domenici and Paul Wellstone, two great heroes of all of ours. My father, Senator Edward Kennedy, was the sponsor after the untimely death of Paul Wellstone. So I had this as not only a professional highlight of my political career, but a personal one, because I got to work with my own father to really pass what I think is a modern-day civil rights bill, because essentially it says not only is the brain part of the body, and does the medical establishment need to reimburse for mental health care the same as it would all other health care, but it really is about embracing all of us in our whole health. And if ever we need to integrate mental health, it's now, as we move into healthcare reform and we start to redesign the way our healthcare system operates. It has to include mental health from the ground up, or from the toes up, because up until this time, you know, the head, you get a checkup, but nothing like a checkup from the neck up. It's amazing that one organ of the body we need to get treated more than any other organ of the body that has more implications for the rest of our body, we ignore in healthcare.
That's one of the other big issues that I know you talk about a lot is stigma.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot, people don't come forward for treatment very often because there's a stigma attached to mental health, mental illness in this country.
So not only am I the sponsor of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, I'm also a consumer of mental health care. And I join those who are quote-unquote faces and voices of recovery. Faces and voices of recovery.org. I'd encourage people to go online, because we need to empower those that are in recovery, thanks to mental health interventions, and get them to be better consumers of our political system. So we need to translate advocacy into the political process, because parity is not going to become a reality unless people demand it. Frederick Douglass always said, power concedes nothing without demand. Never has, never will. So just because it's the right thing to do does not mean that mental health is going to become part of our healthcare system, unless consumers, principally consumers, step up and use their voice, collective voice. And I think that's the real need, because that will overcome not only the disparity in healthcare, but also this stigma, which is driven by the notion that we're not entitled to be treated the same as cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, all of which get, primary care, secondary care, tertiary care. But mental health care, well, if you equated it to diabetes, we'd be waiting to amputate your leg or arm, or you went blind. That's how we reimburse for mental health care and addiction. And if you equated it to cancer, we'd be waiting till you had stage 4 cancer before we reimbursed for your health care.
Now, there's a couple of other things I'd just like to touch on quickly. One of the other you campaign on is the cost to the workplace of people who are absent from work because of mental health problems. How big an issue is that in America today?
Well, I think what's going to be the catalyst for a change here, and I encourage your viewers to help us identify those who be willing to appeal their denials of insurance, because we need the force of law to change the law. And that's only going to happen not only regulatorily, which is what I'm working on after having passed the law, but it's also going to happen in our courts through these cases, these class action lawsuits. Because keep in mind, the insurance companies want to keep all this hush-hush, and they want to settle and wrap everybody up so they're not able to talk about it, which is not what we want. We want people to talk about it. So I would encourage your members to appeal and be involved in these class action lawsuits. And the last thing I'd say about workplace, our veterans are returning home from Iraq and Afghanistan. Most of the veterans are Guard and reservists, which means they're going to be working in all of our places of employment across the country. If our employer-based mental health is not adequate, if physical health doesn't cover mental health, then we're going to be denying care to our returning veterans. Because keep in mind, most veterans do not get their care through the VA. They get their care through their employer-based health care. That's why we need to care about this, especially so.
I've only got time for one more question, unfortunately, but I'd like to pull together a couple of the threads you've talked about and talk a little bit about advocacy. How important is it that members of the APA and other people watching the interview do something?
So the law is, there's 6 categories of care. You know, inpatient, in-network, inpatient, out-of-network, outpatient, in-network, outpatient, out-of-network, pharmacy, and emergency care. We need absolute equality in the reimbursement mechanism according to diabetes, what you would expect for diabetes care, and apply that to addiction. And for mental illness, we need to apply what we would do for cardiovascular disease. We cover the whole complement of healthcare. So what I'm saying is we need your viewers to show up in their local state and help us drive parity by showing up and testifying not only at the health exchange hearings, but their insurance commission hearings. Because now we're at a point where we can codify, literally implement parity only if your members and their patients show up and are faces and voices of change.
Congressman, thank you ever so much indeed
for
joining us.
me.
We appreciate it.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.